Good evening and welcome to the Jean Batten Lecture for 2018. This is what we're going to do tonight. And tonight I'd like to acknowledge a number of people, including Classic Flyers for having us in this venue, and especially for Jan and Alex for reception for tonight, so thank you very much for that. VIP guests, Greg Brownless, Mayor of Tauranga, and Bill and Nolene Reeves, the Manager of Air New Zealand, Tauranga. So our guest speaker tonight is unaccompanied, but his name is Richard Waugh, and he's here in the front row, and we'll talk a little bit more about him in a moment. So I'd like to welcome members and guests of the Bay of Plenty branch. Some actually are former NAC airline staff members. I'd also like to acknowledge our previous speakers, some of who are here tonight. I won't name them, but you can see them. The Aviation Historical Society New Zealand members, and Richard and Peter in the front row are members. Also my colleagues, some of my colleagues in the Classic Flyers Volunteers group, and to Dave Homewood, who's doing the video tonight, and this is the first time we've been able to acknowledge him as an honorary member of the Bay of Plenty branch. That was made on the basis of Dave's work with the Wings Over New Zealand web forum. He does that day in and day out, and maybe you can tell us what your following is.
It's over 5,600 members. So.
Right, so there you go. So this is another opportunity for members of the public, individuals, whether they have aviation backgrounds or not, just an interest. You can log on and follow the progress. One of the things that one of my committee members, Mike Feist, does is post onto Dave's website, Wings Over New Zealand, the progress we are making on our Avenger torpedo bomber down in number 3 hangar, and every week Mike goes around and takes pictures, and suddenly the next night they appear on the website. So that's good. And lastly, I'd like to acknowledge the support of my committee, Jack Best, Mike Feist, Wally G and Graham Lister. Graham's an ex-NAC man, and easy to get him going, just talk about airlines. So his expertise was at freight, and served in the as I said, in NAC. So the two pictures there are pieces of the NAC displays that are at Classic Flyers. One's a display that we'll invite you to go and look at after the lecture. It's in the main hangar, so very easy to get to. And the second is the refurbished Heron, de Havilland Heron, which is at the bottom. So what does the branch do? The Bay of Plenty branch of the Royal Aeronautical Society is a division, is part of the New Zealand division. So it basically does what it thinks is appropriate to preserve and protect and extend and progress the knowledge of aviation in New Zealand. And one of the things, as well as branch meetings and lectures and field days that we do, we participate and create some of the keeping in touch with aviation, which Mike Feist does, along with Grayson Ottaway, who's another avid aviation buff. I think his handle is Aviation Geek. So that tells you how keen he is on it. The next airfield days, we're thinking of going to Whitianga. There's a group there that is building a an aircraft in the school, and we've been watching those, and we will go and visit them later in the year. The last thing that I'd like to mention is the recognition of people in aviation, and every year the New Zealand division has an annual awards program, and the Bay of Plenty branch has made the following nominations to these people. So some are in the room. They have received invites to a dinner, which rather suggests that the nomination is going to bear fruit, but we won't know until the end of October. So Meritorious Service Award nomination for Andrew Gormley, who you know from here, and Bruce Chapman, who you also know from here. The E.A. Gibson Award is an exceptional one. It's exceptional contribution to New Zealand agricultural aviation. And if you remember, last year we did a Meritorious Service Award to another ag pilot. His name is Derek Williams, and that was successful. Andy Stevenson, not so well known to us, but certainly on the East Coast, having operated for 50 years in ag aviation, and with a company called Farmers Air, which he originated. So that's sort of a bit of an idea of what we do. And last thing before we get on to the lecture is the Gene Batten lecture. This is the history of it. So it was conceived as a named lecture. It's one of the things that the Aeronautical Society does worldwide, and we felt that Gene Batten was a worthy person to name a lecture after. She was born in Rotorua, so we consider that part of the Bay of Plenty, and that was in 1909. And the first lecture in 2016 talked about the exploits of Gene Batten. Our speaker, Brian Loxton, had mixed views on the merits of Gene Batten, not on her skill as a pilot, but on her contribution that she made to New Zealand aviation. He thought it was less than some might have viewed. Last year we had Brian Loxton come back to do another lecture, and this is around the W100, which is the 100th anniversary of World War I, with an aviation theme, and the lecture was called New Zealand in the Air War 1914-18. And he chose Lieutenant William Byrne, who was the first New Zealand casualty airman in World War I, and covered a whole range of other things. We did have a plan for, like to plan a year ahead, but in the middle of the year we came up with a new challenge, and the new challenge was answered somewhat by Graham Lister's program, where he convenes the NAC staff reunion lunches every year, and this one was the year of the Godwit, which was the last time the Godwit flew. And the Godwit, if you hadn't realised, is the brand for NAC. The ZK NAC was the first of the line to fly, to fly the Godwit brand, and of course the Tauranga will have also seen the Godwit fly here aboard the Whaka Friendship. Interesting, the other aircraft never had it, so this, I'm not sure when the Godwit appeared and when it disappeared, but we do know that it disappeared in 1978, and I'm sure Richard will tell us about that shortly. So before handing over to Richard, I'd just like to give you a quick background of Richard. He was raised on the West Coast in an aviation family. His dad was a World War II pilot and came to New Zealand and flew on the West Coast with the aviation pioneers there. Richard is a member of the Aviation Historic Society of New Zealand, and his passion for aviation is in airline history. He's part of a group which is called New Zealand Airline History, and there's a website, and there's a dozen or so books that he and others have authored. So the two people that have contributed to that group is Richard himself and Peter Lane, who's sitting in the front row here. Richard is a member of the Honourable Company of Airline Pilots, of which he's the chaplain, and his day job is a Wesleyan chaplain in the southeastern side of Auckland City. So with no further ado, I will take over the support of Richard as he delivers his speech, and after the speech we'll invite questions, and then we'll do a formality which we like to do here, which is called a vote of thanks, and I'll ask Graham Lister to do that. So bear with us for a sec or two while we change out. Yeah, isn't it?
Does somebody know about how to put this on? The switch.
Is that better?
It's on now.
Can I take that off here? Pull that one out. Where does it go?
Well, folks, just while Des is getting all ready there, because I've got quite a pictorial talk for you. Thank you for the welcome, and especially having Mayor Greg with us too, and many other guests. I know some of your faces. Great to see you, especially the NAC family people, and some of you will be able to interject, be as polite as you can. Because I have, as I say, a pictorial sort of overview of NAC and its significant contribution to New Zealand as our national airline from 1947 to 1978. And in fact, one of the statistics I touch on at the end is that 30 million passengers were carried by NAC. Remarkable history and story, and we'll see when we can get underway. I want to first of all give a little bit of political background in terms of the setup, how it was set up by the government out of World War II. That'll just take me a few minutes, and then we'll sort of get into the rhythm, and I've analysed it in 4-year blocks, right from 1947 to 1978. So we'll see how we get on. You'll see some of the images on the screen, and I do acknowledge Peter Lane here, one of my co-authors, who's really an expert on NAC. In fact, his father worked for NAC the entire time, didn't he, from 1947 to 1978. Here's the guidebook there too, right. All set it is?
Yeah.
Well, when the Governor-General, Cyril Newell, put down his pen after signing the New Zealand National Airways Act into law on the 7th of December 1945, just a few months after the war ended, it marked the end of a long political process and the beginning of a new era that would shape New Zealand aviation for more than a third of a century. Now, the new legislation in part stated an act to make provision for the incorporation of the New Zealand National Airways Corporation for the purpose of establishing and operating national air transport services to meet the needs of the people of New Zealand and for the purpose of fostering and encouraging the use of air transportation within New Zealand and between New Zealand and other countries, and to make provision for other matters incidental thereto. Now, before the war broke out, back in 1934, New Zealand Air Services were brought under the control of the Transport Coordination Board. First of the new air licences were granted on the 4th of December 1934 to East Coast Airways at Gisborne to operate from Gisborne to Hawke's Bay to Napier, and to Air Travel New Zealand Limited of Hokitika, where I grew up as a child, to operate services to South Westland. So no surprise, the first two airlines in New Zealand, Gisborne and Hokitika, for obvious reasons of conquering isolation. It was Captain Bert Mercer's Hokitika airline that was first to fly, pioneering scheduled services from December 1934. Followed by East Coast Airways in Gisborne, Cook Strait Airways in Nelson, and then Union Airways from Palmerston North. Now, these were privately owned regional airlines, all soon underway using a variety of British de Havilland biplanes, and we'll see one of them on the screen next. So they use DH-83, 84, 86 and 89 aircraft. That's a DH-86 there at the bottom, Union Airways. And Union Airways originally wanted to be called National Airways, but the government of the time banned the use of the term national by any non-government organisations, and so licences were soon granted to Union Airways for main trunk routes with Maurice Clark as manager and later general manager. Now, Union Airways, with 99.2% of its shares held by the Union Steamship Company. The shipping companies were very clever. They recognised they were in the transportation business, and so they invested heavily in aviation. Established its base in Palmerston North and inaugurated services with the DH-86 in January 1936, and the pioneering service flew from Palmerston North, considered the sort of centre of New Zealand at that time, to Woodburn and Blenheim, to Wigram and Christchurch, and to Tyree in Dunedin. And in the first year, the airline carried 6,871 passengers and achieved, of its scheduled 736 flights, only 9 were cancelled due to bad weather. The 1930s, the late 1930s, were a very halcyon period of airline advance in New Zealand, with routes being established by these 4 pioneer airlines from Auckland in the north to Dunedin in the south, and safe and regular services were established, which was a real tribute to the Kiwi pilots, engineers and administration staff, and a testimony also to the remarkable reliability of the pioneering aircraft. And while there were some accidents during those early years, there were no passenger fatalities in the late 1930s, quite remarkable. Now, with this private enterprise success, it should be recognised that much of the civil aviation infrastructure costs, such as aerodromes and airways communications, were borne by the government. So from late 1939, New Zealand was at war. The government took over many of the airline's aircraft, reducing Union Airways operations to a limited Lockheed Electra service flying from Auckland to Dunedin. And helped by the introduction of a later larger Lockheed Lodestar aircraft in 1943, some expansion was possible by Union Airways later to Invercargill. In early 1945, services to Napier and Gisborne recommenced. Now, during the war years, the government had not been idle in its consideration of what was going to happen when World War II came to an end, and what was going to happen in terms of the shape of airline services. And a key early decision had been the New Zealand government partnering with those of Australia and Britain to become shareholders of Tasman Empire Airways Limited, TEAL, which began the first international services from Australia to New Zealand in April 1940. From the time of the Labour Party gaining office in 1935, policy was developed for public control of key services, including Pioneer Airlines. And there's a report that was published in 1935 that supported the contention, endorsed by the government of the time, that air transport should be viewed as a public utility, and it was not viable, acknowledging New Zealand's small population and geographical shape, for there to be competing airlines. Instead, a state controlled airline would be best. And this led to the suggestion of a statutory corporation operating on a non-profit and non-competitive basis similar to Trans-Canada Airlines. So the draft bill was put together and went to the Minister in August 1945 and included the important provision for compulsory acquisition of the private-owned airlines, not without some opposition, I might add. So the New Zealand National Airways Act 1945 passed through the House of Representatives and the Legislative Council November 1945 and was signed into law just over a week later, early December 1945. So the creation of the first state corporation and made for a distinctive entity, one which had public service obligations but also requirements for financial viability. There we are. So implicit in its brief was the expectation that uneconomic routes, particularly some of the regional routes, would be operated and subsidised by the profits from the main trunk. Makes sense. Another important aspect of the new legislation was provision for the new corporation to operate air services to Fiji and to other Pacific dependencies. And it was clear to many in the government that it was NAC and not Teal that was considered to be New Zealand's airline of the future. Interesting point. First person to be engaged for NAC work was Air Vice Marshal Sir Leonard Isett, as Chairman of Directors, Maurice Clark as General Manager, bringing experience from Union Airways. Now, in the transitional period from September 1946 until NAC officially took over with its licences on the 1st of April 1947, services were maintained partly by Union Airways and partly by the new corporation. In addition to the demands of running an airline that was beginning to experience rapid passenger growth, there were major constraints on spares and the urgent planning requirements for the future. In the 6 months prior to April 1947, that official date, the NAC fleet grew from 9 to 23 aircraft and many converted from Air Force use. Now, the birth of NAC was particularly opportune for the new post-war era that lay ahead. So with an increasingly air-minded population, advancing aviation technology, and World War II had just accelerated that, the availability of reliable war surplus aircraft, and a whole new generation of trained pilots and engineers, the stage was set for absolutely unprecedented growth and development for aviation in New Zealand. However, at the same time, the post-war challenges were immense, with air services having been badly run down during the war years and in need of massive investment. And there remained the very significant task of safely operating a national airline in a unique mountainous island nation which often experienced changing weather while serving a thinly spread population. Challenges. So the success or otherwise of this daunting task was to rely mainly on the calibre and the commitment of the NAC staff, or the NAC family. Well folks, what I've shared thus far is by way of sort of setting the scene in the mid-1940s. So for the remainder of the presentation I want to give this overview, as I mentioned, in 4-year blocks of the remarkable development of NAC from 1947 to 1978. A brand that became iconic here in New Zealand. Its demise 40 years ago this year, 1978. So first of all, the pioneering efforts. This is a rare colour photograph of a Lodestar at Nelson in 1950. And ironically, it was both continuity and change that characterised the first pioneering years of NAC. There was continuity of operations having been taken over from Union Airways, and at the same time fast-paced change with a greatly increased passenger demand, newer aircraft, and recruitment of many more staff, of course almost all ex-Air Force. In January 1947, the transitional airline pioneered a new route to Northland, Whangarei, Kaikohe and Kaitaia, and many of the foundational NAC aircraft were the most visible expression of the transfer of assets of war to civil purposes. So 6 DH-89 Dominis, Bruce Chapman here knows all about these, were among the first new additions, and their familiar wartime name quickly overtook the usage of the pre-war Rapide name. Many Lockheed Lodestars and 2 second-hand Lockheed Electras were also purchased. But what really made for a significant step forward was the takeover of the Dakota transport aircraft from the RNZF in June 1947 and the introduction later that year of modified and refurbished DC-3 aircraft called Douglas airliners. Now, these aircraft flew the direct Auckland to Christchurch service and were to be synonymous with NAC for the next 27 years, and here in Tauranga too. In November 1947, the regional services in the Southwest Pacific were taken over from the Air Force and carried out on behalf of the government. These South Pacific NAC services provided an important air link from New Zealand to Norfolk Island, Fiji, Tonga, Western Samoa and the Cook Islands. And the Pacific service had considerable political and social importance but required subsidies to offer. And Sunderland flying boats were used on the weekly Auckland to Fiji service and on occasions charters to the Chatham Islands until this route was transferred to Teal. In fact, Peter Lane's father was one of the NAC Sunderland pilots. DC-3 aircraft were used on the other longer routes, a weekly flight to Norfolk Island and a fortnightly flight via Norfolk Island to the other Pacific territories. There was even an international claim by NAC that their DC-3 service, with an 875 nautical mile sector from Norfolk Island to Fiji, was the longest regular direct overwater flight flown by DC-3 in the world. Domestic passenger numbers increased at a fast pace in the late 1940s and early 50s, and in tandem, NAC staff numbers tripled and engineering numbers almost quadrupled as the new corporation struggled to keep pace with the demand for air services and increasing numbers of Kiwis flying. In addition to the long-established engineering workshop at Palmerston North, which was the main base, other workshops were established at Whenuapai, Gisborne, Hokitika, and a major new facility at Christchurch. Now, in conjunction with this growth, NAC faced a range of other challenges, including the extensive training of new staff to suit the civilian situation, meeting civil aviation regulations and protocols and engineering constraints, especially related to flying a diverse fleet, which is always a big challenge. It was a demanding time, especially for engineering management. Here's one of the Pacific DC-3s. Temporary headquarters for NAC were established in Wellington on Aotearoa Quay there, which continued to 1961. And initiatives were also taken to form a public relations branch, quite unusual in New Zealand at the time. And this was to have a crucial role in the promotion of air travel for ordinary New Zealanders. And a key strategy was to increase NAC's profile in every region. So within a couple of years of commencement, NAC opened branch offices in Auckland, Hamilton, Gisborne, Rotorua, Palmerston North, Wellington, Christchurch, Dunedin and Suva, as well as appointing agents in many other centres. District managers were appointed, with the first being Doug Patterson in Auckland in 1948. So this regional presence, and of course here in Tauranga as well, was, I think, a key success factor for NAC, and eventually led to the corporation having a very high profile throughout New Zealand in a way that Teal and Air New Zealand never had. Now, amid this growth and expansion, NAC experienced 4 serious aircraft accidents, all within 12 months. It was a horrendous time. First one, April 1948, right here in Tauranga Airport, when a Lockheed Electra ZK AGJ crashed on approach, fortunately with no injuries. The plane literally hit the water, ran up onto the beach, and everyone got out, some of them without even getting their feet wet. But not so with the others. In August 1948, a DC-3 freighter crashed on Craggy Ridge near Port Underwood in the Marlborough Sounds with the loss of 2 crew. 2 months later, on October 1948, Lockheed Electra ZK-AGK, that's Kaka, crashed on Mount Ruapehu with a loss of 2 crew and 11 passengers.